Alright, ladies and gents, in today's video we're going to go over how to catch trout. I'm going to go over rods, reels, fishing line, gear, everything you could use to go out and have a successful day on the lake trying to catch some trout. So let's see how we do.
Yeah, there you go.
Alright, first thing I think we should talk about is what kind of rod to get. Now trout are great fun to catch, but they're not typically a large fish. I mean, when you're dealing with hatchery trout, they feed them like crazy at the hatcheries, and they can grow them pretty big, you know, 10 plus, like you see sometimes on YouTube and you know, at tackle shops and that. You see the pictures of the real big trout. But typically, if trout were in the wild, it's rare they'll get that size. Most of the fish you're going to catch are going to be in the 1 to 2 pound range for the most part. But at the same time, you need to be prepared, because you very well could get a 10 plus on your line, and then you're going to have to deal with it and hopefully be successful getting it in. So what you're going to want is a ultralight rod in the 1 to 6 pound range, weight range, or the 2 to 6 pound weight range. If you have stuff heavy, if you already have rods on hand, there's an old saying I have: run what you brung. You can use it. I've helped guys out that were fishing with pretty stout rods, near surf fishing rods, and I was able to get them onto trout, but that was more about what kind of fishing line they were using, but we'll get to that later. But there's 3 rods I have here that are very reasonable. This is a Shakespeare Micro Series. These are really good rods for the price. They're usually 20 bucks or even cheaper. They sell them at Walmart. You can also find them online. But this is a graphite rod. This one's 7'6". I recommend you stay anywhere as far as your length in between 6 to 8 feet. Mainly for casting distance. Most of the time your trout are not going to be more than 30 feet off the bank. They're going to be fairly close. So you can use a 5-foot rod, but there's going to be those instances where they're going to be a little bit further out, and you're going to have a harder time with that 5-foot rod getting good casts out at that distance. So a good middle of the road is about 6 to 8 feet, especially when you're fishing bait. So this Micro Series, excellent buy. In a lot of my past videos, if you look back, I'm using these very rods. These are actually decent mini jig rods too. Surprisingly, I'm not a expert at mini jigging, but there are quite a few videos where it'll show me in using mini jigs, and I'm using this rod to catch them on. Another rod that I really like is the Akuma Celio. Akuma makes a lot of good products that are reasonably priced. This one is probably going to run you between 40 and 50 bucks, which is still not bad for a rod. Sometimes you can find them on sale around 40 or less. But this is a real nice rod. This is an 8'6" rod. This is the rod I use for doing slip bobber fishing and a lot of bait and weight stuff. It's a longer rod, which works, but you don't necessarily have to have one that long. I usually prefer 6 to 8, but this one works great for throwing bait. And this one's in the 2 to 6 pound range as well. And the last rod I got is a Diawa Spin-Matic. This is another rod. It's $30 to $40 price range. Excellent light rod. It's fairly stiff. It has a lot of action. It's real good for if you want to also throw spoons or spinners. It's a good rod for that. This one's in the 2 to 6 pound range as well. This is an 8-foot. I just have a thing for 8-foot. I really like 8-foot, but that's me. A lot of guys like shorter. A lot of guys go up to 9, but you will figure that out the more you fish, and what you like and what you don't like. But this is another excellent rod. Now, the purpose of the rod too is not only to cast, but when you're fighting the fish, because what the rod does is it has obviously flex in it, and it bends. And what that does is it acts like a shock absorber for your fishing line. Now, your fishing line, you can't rely only on your drag to keep it from snapping. What also helps is the rod itself being bent. So when you're fighting the fish, you want to keep the rod up at about a 45-degree angle so there's a good bend in it. If you don't have a good bend, like lots of times I see guys, what they'll do is they'll get on a fish and they point the fishing rod directly at the fish. Well, basically what you're doing if you do that is you're taking the rod completely out of the fight. So all the fish is fighting is your line and your drag. The rod is there to help you. It's a tool, and it's made that way for a reason, to keep pressure off the line. Because if you just rely strictly on the line and your drag, you're gonna break off more times than not, especially if you get a decent sized fish. For trout, I like to stick between a 1,000 series reel and a 2,000 series reel. The numbers pertain basically to the size of the reel. So a 1,000 is a good all-around reel. Like for reference, here's a 500 series reel. Now I've used these for trout many times. I usually use these for stream rods up in the Sierras because they're smaller. But the biggest issue with a 500 as opposed to a 1,000 is spool size, and you can see it right there. On the 500, it's a very, very small spool. Additionally, if you have a 7-8 foot rod, the distance as this sits on the rod from your spool to the first eyelet is going to be pretty great, and that'll also affect your casting distance. Whereas this 1,000 series is more designed for a bigger rod like that, and you'll get a better cast out of it. Show you a little bit of the anatomy of a spinning reel. Up here is the switch for the drag, and it's righty-lefty, or righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, just like anything else. And your drag is what allows line to come off when the fish is running or pulling real hard, so it doesn't put too much stress on the line. Because if you put too much stress on the line, you fight with no drag and this thing doesn't move at all. Every ounce of that's just going to be your rod and the line trying to hold back, and the break strength on the line is not going to be that great, and you're going to snap off, especially if you got a bigger size fish. You may be able to get in a couple trout without using any drag, but if you catch in anything sizable, or you get one that really has a lot of fight in them, which is common, you're going to break off. Now, how I like to set the drag is to where enough line comes off just with a decent pull where it has some tension on it. Let me see if I can get this line off here and I can show you. Okay, so the way I like to do it is to where you can pull and there's some resistance. That's probably a little too loose, so I want to tighten it down a little bit till it's a little bit tighter. But basically the way you want it is, so when you reel and you're fighting a fish, the drag is not active if the fish isn't actively running. So you don't want to hear this noise while you're trying to reel and gain ground on the fish. When the fish wants to run, basically you need to stop reeling. So when it starts pulling line like that, just stop reeling, keep your rod at a 45-degree angle, and let it run. And eventually it's going to tire out, and as soon as it tires out, then you start reeling and gaining more ground back on them. Now, in the back here, there's these switches, this one switch, and it's on 99% all the spinning reels. And one, you can only reel one way. And then if you switch it this way, you can reel both ways. And what that is it's called back reeling. And that's not really something you're going to need to worry about. But what people do is sometimes when they're on a really big fish, they'll switch that on and they'll actually feed the fish line. And at the same time, your drag still works. So if it's pulling a lot of line, like say you got just a monster fish on there, and you're afraid it's going to spool you or it's going to break you off, you can switch that on and feed it line yourself while the drag is still working. Now, to be honest with you, I have never in my life used that fighting a fish. But it's on there. And that's all that thing is. So if you're real interested in trying it out, try it out and play with it. In all my years, I've never used it. I've always relied on the drag. The drag is usually enough to save me. In some cases, maybe there's some cases where I should have used it and probably could have saved a fish, but I've never broken off so many fish where I felt like that I really needed to do that. Oh, and then this deal on here, this is a kickstand. This is an extra accessory that I purchased. It's not anything you have to have. I have it because, like, I'll use this reel for maybe drop shotting or throwing mini jigs, and say my bait rod goes off. All that is it's a stand so you can set your reel down, and the main components don't sit in the dirt. That's all it is. So it doesn't sit on its side and get the drag in the dirt. It's just to help keep it clean in those emergency situations where you got to set your rod down real quick. That's all that thing is. So you don't need to have that. I just have a couple of them. All right, now types of reels that you can get. Like this one is an excellent reel. This is a Diawa Legalis 1000. This is an outstanding reel for the price. This is about a $50 reel, but it does everything. If you want to just do bait and weight, or if you want to throw mini jigs or spoons or whatever you want to do, this is a great reel for the price. Can't say enough good things about it. Mainly for all the functionality you get, and the feel of this thing for 50 bucks is really, really, really good. In contrast, this is a Shimano Sahara. This is a really good reel as well, but this is a $70, $80 reel. But if you were to fish both of these side by side, I doubt you would be able to tell much of a difference. So price point, I would go with Legalis, even though this is a really good reel. Shimano makes lots of really nice reels that are low priced. You can get all the way up to a over here I got a Vanford, which is the new hotness. This is a $230 reel. This is very expensive, at least for me. But mainly the big deal with it is it's light. And I do a lot of drop shotting and spoon throwing. And when you're throwing all day long, it helps to have something a little bit lighter. But that's really the big difference with this one is the weight. It's only about 5-ounce reel, but this is expensive. For bait and weight, you don't gotta break the bank for sure. This reel right here, I know it's a 500 series, but just for instance, you can buy these at Walmart in packages. I think I paid probably 20 bucks for this reel, and I've had this reel probably 20 years, and it's a great little reel. They also have, obviously, 1000 series reels, different makes and models, but Shimano is a real good go-to. Also, Akuma. This is an Akuma Avenger 1000. This one I actually still use as a bait and weight reel currently. This one's a bait feeder. Don't worry about that. It's something I bought just to try out. It doesn't really work great with trout. But this is, I think, about a $40 reel. Not very expensive. And Akuma has a lot of reels just like Shimano does. They're in the $20, $30 range, which are really, really good reels. So that's what I'd recommend. Something Daiwa, Shimano, or Akuma, at least are my favorites. I know you could talk to other guys and they may have another brand. That's totally fine. I am not a reel authority. I'm just giving you what I use and what I've liked over the years. All right, now let's talk about line. And line is the single most important thing to me when you're going after trout. The reason being is trout are extremely line shy in Southern California. I have some friends that fish out of state, and you watch some of these YouTube videos of guys trout fishing out of state, and they use some pretty heavy line. But out there, for whatever reason, the trout don't seem to care. Out here, if the trout can see your line, you're not going to get very many bites. I mean, yeah, you can go on those days where it's really good fishing, all the trout are biting, and you may have an experience where you're catching fish on, 10-pound line, but that is rare. Usually when the fish are less apt to bite, that's the first thing that's going to discourage your bites, if they can see your line. So these are all the lines I use or have used at different times. You have your monofilaments and your fluorocarbons. Monofilament is a fine line. It's a cheaper line. The biggest difference is it's actually more visible than your fluorocarbon or fluoro-coated lines. This line is Runkle Line. If you watch my videos, I use this pretty much primarily right now. I use a 6 pound and a 5 pound. I go back and forth. But the biggest reason is it's nearly invisible in the water. You have that extra strength, and the line diameter of the 6 is the same as this 4. So I was sold right there. I wanted to try it. I tried it. I really like it. It's reasonably priced. You can get it on Amazon, but it's decent line. This P line here is a fluoro coat as well, but it's coated over mono, and it is excellent line for the price. This spool is 3,000 yards. I think you can get it for about 50 bucks. I bought this a long time ago, and have been spooling reels on it for a long time, and still got plenty of line left. But P line is excellent line. Berkeley Vanish is also good line. I used to use that in my earlier videos before I went from P line and then to Runkle. But it's fine line. Iser line's great line. A lot of the Maxima is good stuff. But the biggest thing is your line weight. Usually you want to stay between 2 and 4 pounds. 2 pound is really great line. It's real thin. Trout can't see it, but the problem is its break strength is not very great. So you usually, if you're using 2 pound line, you're usually more of an advanced fisherman. I never liked it. I fish in a lot of areas where there's a lot of debris sometimes, and I've had too many experiences with 2 pound where I was breaking off a lot. So I ended up going with 4, and I was very happy with 4. And then now I go between this 4 and 6, but this is a special thinner fluorocoat line. Another difference with mono as opposed to fluorocarbon is fluorocarbon is actually heavier than mono. Monofilament will actually float on top of the water. If you fish before, you can see it laying on there. The fluorocarbon or fluorocoats, they'll sit there for a bit and then they'll start to sink. Now the reason why that's important is when you're bait fishing for trout, you have to use floating bait. And if your bait doesn't float, it's on the bottom, you're not likely to get a bite from a trout. So if the line is putting weight on your bait as well as the hook, as well as the bait as it dissolves, or if you have a smaller artificial worm that doesn't float that great, you may have to size down hooks with this and be more mindful of it, where the mono is a little bit more forgiving. But many times I've been out at the lake and been catching fish, and someone next to me was using a really big rod, and it looked like they had heavy line. I ended up talking to them and went over to them, and they weren't getting anything. And basically it was because their line was too heavy. So I just ended up tying up a quick leader for them with 4 pound. And wouldn't you know, after a few minutes, they're into a fish. So it's really, really important if you're fishing around Southern California to have the lighter class lines, or at least line that is not visible in the water, because the trout really seem to have good eyesight and will really pick up on it. All right, now I'm going to give you a quick run through on how to spool line onto a spinning reel. A lot of times when you buy your new spinning reel, it's going to come with a sticker on the spool. So you just got to take that off and make sure at least that the sticker is not on there. And what you need to do is flip the bail back, get some line. Let me find a tag in the line here, and tie it onto the spool. Now, there's bunches of different ways to do this. There's all kinds of special knots guys like to. So if you're into knots and you want to do all that, there's plenty of videos on special knots on putting on a spool, on a spinning reel spool. What I do is I just do a couple overhand knots. Do one like that. And the second one. And pull it tight. And get some scissors and clip off this little tag end as close as you can. And then flip your bail back. All right, now what you need to do is attach this to a rod, and you just set this spool on the ground in front of you and just slowly reel in And then what you do while you're holding the rod is pinch with your fingers right in front of it, just to put a little bit of tension on it, so it goes on the rod with a little bit of tension, or I'm sorry, on the reel. And when you fill it up, you don't want to overfill it. So here's a reel that's already been filled, and you can see right in here there's a little lip, and you see how the line goes right up to it, and it's got about maybe a 1/16 of an inch gap. That's about as full as you want it, because what's going to happen is if you overfill it and it goes past that little lip, as soon as you open this reel to or the bail to cast, line is got memory in it, and it's from being spooled on these spools, it's going to start springing off, and you're going to get what's called a wind knot, and it's going to be a nightmare, and it's going to frustrate you, and you're probably not going to want to go fishing again. So the best advice I can give you is that lip is there for a reason. So fill it just right up till it's about, so you can still see the lip, but I'd say about a 1/16 or an 1/8 inch in, and then you still have enough line on to get a good cast, but there's the right amount of line on here, so when you open it up, it's not going to want to shoot off of there. Okay? All right, now here's a couple of videos that'll show those things in practice. How to hold your rod when you're fighting the fish, and the importance of setting your drag, and even the importance of setting your drag or loosening your drag while you're fighting the fish. In this clip, I'm fighting a solid trout. It's about a 2-pounder, I think it ended up being. And in a second here, you're going to see it's take a pretty good run on me. Nice one. And you'll see me just hold the rod up at a 45 and just let it run until it tires out. And then I start reeling again and gaining some ground back. So it's just that simple. Alright, in this video, exact same principles, but much bigger fish. This fish ended up being just shy of 8 pounds. You're going to see it's going to take a monster run on me. And see, it's just taking off, and geez, I felt like it was near going to spool me. But you just hang on, let it run, and then what you can do also, as you'll see, is I'm adjusting the drag as I fight the fish. You know, because you got such a massive fish, it's easy for it to break your line. So you don't want your drag too tight, but you also don't want it too loose, because you can see he's swimming halfway across the lake with my line. So there's never any problem with adjusting your drag. It's never set in stone. All right, in this next section, we're going to talk about tools, terminal tackle, like your hooks and your weights, how to set up your rigs, and bait. The baits I like, and the baits I have the most success with, and exactly how to rig them and how to present them to get the fish to bite. Okay, here are some of the tools that I use anytime I go fishing. I mainly fish for trout, so these are all geared towards trout fishing. But first thing that's really important, or at least I like to use, you don't have to have this, but it's a fish gripper, and what this deal does is a little clamp, and it goes inside the trout's mouth, so it's easier to handle them. So you don't have to really get a tight grip on them with your hands or any of that. And sometimes you can just grab these the trout by the mouth, pull them out, and it makes it easier to remove the hook. This one is one of the best ones I ever found, especially for trout. Bass Pro Shops makes them. It's a Bass Pro Shop brand. I'll put a link in the description to these, but I think they're like 11 bucks, and these things work great on trout. Needle nose pliers for removing hooks, some kind of small, I believe it's a forceps, if stuff gets way down in there and you got to get in deep to get your hook out. And then this deal is a hook remover made by a Fishing Legend, and this thing works really, really good. It's got a slit in it, and what you do is when you get the fish, you have to have someone either hold your rod or put your rod in the pole holder while you're holding the fish, and put tension on the line, and you slide the line in between this little slit and just slide it down into the fish's mouth where it comes to rest on the hook, and just pop it down and the hook comes right out. It's real good tool, and it's real easy to remove the hooks. And then you also need either scissors like these. These are Gerber shears, and these things are the best I've found. They cut braid real well and mono no problem, and these are very old scissors, and they're still sharp as hell. And they're relatively inexpensive. I don't remember how much I paid for them, but you're not going to break the bank with these scissors. And they work really good. But a lot of the videos you'll see I wear a fanny pack, And these are the tools that are in there. So as soon as I catch a fish, I have everything right at hand. I don't have to look around for it. And it's a really good thing to have at least some of these tools, because once you get the fish, you're going to be like, okay, now what? And you got to remove the hook, put the fish on the stringer, and all these things. And these tools all make that very, very much easier. Last thing I want to talk to you about under tools is a net. And nets are important. I see a lot of guys when they go to the store and they realize they're going to fish for trout, they get the small stream nets. And that's fine where the handle's only about this long, where my hand is. And they'll work for trout, but the problem is those nets are designed for guys wearing waders in the stream, so you're in the water with the fish. It can be quite difficult if you're using this on the shore. So what you got to get is what's called a landing net. And a landing net basically just has an extra pole on here. And this is just a smaller sized one, but it gives you the ability to reach out into the water to get the fish so you don't have to get wet. The other big suggestion I can make is get a rubber net. Cloth nets work, especially if you're just using bait and weight, but if you ever use lures, or especially a crankbait like a plug, you get a fish in a cloth net, what the first thing they do is they start spinning and thrashing once they're in the net, and that hook is going to catch all that cloth material and just start doing this. And it's near impossible to get it out without cutting the net sometimes. These rubber nets don't do that as much. So they'll still get tangled a little bit, but it's much, much easier to get the fish out of these rubber nets. All right, now I'm going to show you rod holders. And these are a few just very generic rod holders, and how these deals work. You can see they have a spike on the bottom. You just drive that into the ground and stick your rod butt right in the end. Now what's important about these rod holders, especially if you're going to use a strike indicator, which over here I'll show you those in a minute, is you want to set this at least a 45-degree angle. You don't necessarily want it sitting straight up and down, because what's going to happen if your rod's straight up and down, your line is going to be way more exposed to the wind, and when the wind blows, it'll catch your line, and it can make it a little bit more messy. So what I like to do is set it at least a 45-degree angle, so it's closer, your rod tip's a little bit closer to the water, so there's less line exposed out in the wind, and you can use these strike indicators. Now these strike indicators are real simple things. Basically all this is a foam bobber I got at Walmart, and then what I use is a Christmas tree ornament hanger to hang it on, but you can use baling wire and bend your own. In a pinch, you can use a fish hook, a single fish hook. The problem is there's a barb on the hook, and every time you get a bite and you're trying to take that off your line, when you pull it off, the barb is going to catch the line almost every time, and you could get a tangle and could end up losing the fish. So I always recommend a Christmas tree ornament hook, or just a basic baling wire bent to that. And I'll show you how that goes on the rod in just a second. This is the other one. This is a bell. So basically it has a clip on it, and you clip this to the end of your rod, and when you get a bite, it rings the bell, which works great. The only downside to these is that when you get the bite, you have to reach up and take this off the tip of your rod, because especially if you have a real small thin rod, and a lot of ultralights are like that up at the tip, and you go to set the hook, the extra weight of this could damage your rod. Also, the noise from this the whole time while you're fighting a fish can get quite annoying. So these are fine. I've used them like when it's dark and I can't see my rod, or if I'm going to walk away where I couldn't see my strike indicator, and I may put one of these bells on. Got a rod out, and I'm going to show you where to set the strike indicator on the rod. The place you want to hang this is on your line in between your first and your second eyelet. So you just want to hang it on there just like so. Okay? And where it finally comes to rest, I like it either just above the water or halfway in between my rod and the water. And the reason for that is when you get a bite, normally the bobber goes up, right? But sometimes the fish will pick up your bait and swim towards you. In that instance, the bobber will go down. And both indications are a strong indicator that you got a bite. So you got to pay attention to that. So I like to set it usually right above the water, because sometimes when you're doing bait and weight, you're looking at your phone, you're talking with people, you're not paying attention. And if I notice at one point my bobber's here, and then after a few minutes I look back, and now it's down sitting in the water, something's happened. Either I got a bite, something hit my line underwater, who knows? But I want to go check my rod. Now when you cast out, when you're setting this, you're going to have a lot of slack line for the line, because the line's taking time to settle. It's got to sink. The weight's got to set up on the floor where its final resting place. So when you put this on, initially it's going to sit like that, and then over a couple seconds it's going to start dropping real slowly. And that's not necessarily a fish. That's just your line settling. So what you need to do is just reel up, and then it's probably going to drop a little bit more. And then reel up until it finally comes to a resting point, and then you want to set your depth of your strike indicator by either pulling out some drag or reeling up a little bit. And then when the fish is on and it's up like that, well, that one fell off, you just pull it off and set the hook. And it's simple as that. All right, here's all the bait that I use. These are the most popular trout baits. All baits that I've used over the years with success. The number one bait is got to be Powerbait. Powerbait's been around for a long time. It's got the special herbs and spices in it that the trout like, whatever that is. But Powerbait's great. Comes in a variety of colors. I always say when you buy Powerbait, I am going to show you my favorites, but have a variety, because sometimes my favorites aren't hitting, so I got to go to something else, different color, different scent. Mice tails are excellent as well, because there's days they don't want Powerbait, they only want mice tails, and only want a certain color mice tails. Another interesting thing that mice tails show us is how important color contrast is. As you can see, the heads are different colored than the bodies, and it's very rare you'll find mice tails that are all one color. And that's because fish like color contrast. Something about the different colors, it maybe makes it look more natural in the water, and they're more willing to take a bite. Power worms, these are great. As you can see, they're also different colored. They got kind of some off colors and some streaks and sparkles. Again, with the color contrast, but power worms are great. These are rubber worms, but I have these to represent night crawlers. I just don't have any live night crawlers with me, but night crawlers are a staple bait. All fish like worms, and trout are no exception. And then we got Power Eggs by Berkeley. I just take them out of the jars and put them in this plastic bag. That's why they're packaged like this. I also sometimes will throw a little scent in here, so they're always marinating in some scent. You don't have to do that. I literally just put them in the bag because it saves room, because you end up with a whole bunch of these jars on top of the Powerbait jars, and they will keep just fine in a Ziploc. So I'm going to go through all these individually, reveal what my favorites are and which ones I like to fish, and then show you little videos of all these baits in action. So let's get to that. All right, I'm going to show you how I bait up my hooks when I'm using Powerbait. You can use either a treble hook or a number 10 Mosquito. Both work okay. I prefer the treble. I think the bait holds on a little bit better. Lots of guys use a number 10 Mosquito hook and love it. They say it's the greatest thing. For me, I usually have a harder time with the bait staying on, but that literally comes down to personal preference. I have good friends of mine that I fish with all the time, and they always use single hooks and do just great. I just don't have that kind of luck. I'm much better with the treble hook when using Powerbait. So what we're going to do is open our jar, and what this stuff is, the consistency is very similar to Play-Doh, so it's very moldable. So you just get out a little bit with your finger, about like so, and you roll it up into a ball. And then what I like to do is I like to push the treble hook down into it and keep working with it. And I like to make a pretty clean little ball. Now you don't want to put too much on. You just want enough to cover the hook barbs. So see, like there's a little bit too much, so I'll take that little pinch off and put it back in the jar because you can use that later. It all adds up. And you keep mushing it on there, get all the air bubbles out. So it's on there real nice and firm. And there you go. Nice little ball of power bait. And you can see a little bit of the hooks showing there, so I like to pat that down so you can't see it. And there you go. You're almost ready to fish. Now, very important thing. When you're fishing for trout, all these baits need to float. If it's not floating, you're not fishing. If it's on the bottom, the trout probably aren't going to pick it up. It has to float. So what I always like to do is go let this rest in the water. So I go to the edge of the water and I'll just set it in the water for one, to make sure it floats. The other reason is as the water touches this, it kind of cures it a little bit and makes it a little bit more, I don't know if the word's dense, but it makes it a little bit more hardy and it stays on the hook better. So that serves two purposes. One, make sure it floats before you throw it out there, because many times I've been in a hurry, baited something up and threw it out there and I wasn't getting bites and I'm like, what's going on? And once I brought it in and checked into it, my bait wasn't floating because I didn't check. And the other reason is just make your dough bait a little bit more hardy, so when you throw it out, especially if you're really casting far, you're confident that it's not falling off when you're casting. Okay, now there's several different styles you can mold this bait into instead of just a little ball. So like there's, let me get a little bit more. There's one guys will make it into like a snake or a worm. So they'll roll it in their hand and make it kind of oblong. And they'll do it like that. Now the theory is behind this is that when it's in the water, the little water currents and stuff are going to make it move side to side, and it's going to move a little better, thus attracting more fish and more bites. So that's a good technique. And another is one my buddy does called the slug, where it's kind of like the worm, but he just kind of pushes out a smaller, rounded, more tail, and it kind of ends up looking more like a football. Something about like that. And he really likes that. I usually just do the ball, and that's always worked for me over the years. But if you want to do this, fish aren't biting, try it. You never know. It could be that one little thing that changes the bite and gets the fish going. So, my favorite colors, the ones that produce the best for me, are flavors. Garlic, or I call it pale green garlic because it's actually got a pale green tint to it. This is a solid bait. Every lake I go to, I'll either start with this or I'll use it at some point. The fish aren't biting, and usually I'll get something on pale green garlic. This one is like the workhorse for me. It always seems to come through. Pale green garlic, great color. Next one is an older bait, standby, rainbow, or they have rainbow glitter. Back in the day, before they had a lot of flavors of power bait, I was actually fishing and it was slow, and I just took some of my old jars, started mixing them together and kind of created a rainbow bait, and I started catching fish. And then soon after, they came out with rainbow color, so I always joke to my friends, I'm like, man, they stole my idea, but I'm sure they already had the idea long before me. But this goes again back to color contrast. As you can see, there's a bunch of different colors in there, and that's why this is a very effective bait. So my number one, never go without, always seems to work, is lime twist. This bait works great for me. Let me get a look at it in here. But as you can see, there's several different colors in there, yellows and greens. Lime twist always seems to produce. It's worked for me for, God, all the years that I've ever fished with power bait and finally found this stuff. They also have orange twist and lime or lemon twist, and those are all very good power baits as well. But for some reason, lime always seems to work great. Now, one more thing that's important, something that a lot of guys try and that I've tried with success is something that I kind of call Franken Bait. Is get a couple of contrasting colors and mix them together and make your bait. Don't mix the whole jar, but take a little bit out of one and a little bit out of another and ball that up onto your treble hook. So now you have your own kind of twist bait, and you can customize your own colors right there on the shore. So that's another excellent idea. So here I got a video for you. This is actually a never before seen video. Me catching my PB on bait. It's the biggest fish, biggest trout ever caught on bait. Didn't make it out onto YouTube until now. So so take a look at this and hope you like it. Yeah, look at that. Just got a little 18 treble hook on this.
That might be a nice one, bro.
Yeah, it feels heavy. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's a nice fish. There.
Well, that's a nice fish.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me get this off of there. Oh, it looks like 6.2 ounce. 6 pounds, 2 ounces.
Bad.
All right, how to rig up mice tails. We already talked about the color contrast, so I'm going to show you how I hook them. Get one out of here. I always like to use a number 10 mosquito hook when I'm fishing mice tails. I think you can go up as big as an 8 if you want, and this thing will still float. But like I said earlier, it all comes down to whether or not the bait floats. So as long as it's floating, you can use whatever hook you want as long as this bait is floating. But I just prefer the 10. There's a variety of ways to hook these things. Some guys go through the head like this and hook it just like that with the hook hanging out. You can hook these things what's called wacky rigging it, or you kind of hook it in the middle. And this is one that's a good one because you get more action out of the bait when the current's in the water. This will move around a lot more. And it's an easy way to present it. You can hook it down through the middle, like thread it. So it gives a similar presentation to a wacky rig, but the hook's a little bit more hidden in it. So as you can see, the hook is just barely sticking out there. But it's still in the water. It's going to present in kind of a wacky style. So that works, especially maybe if the trout are being a little bit shy. The way I always hook it, and this is just, again, personal preference, is I go right, what I call the neck, right where the head meets the tail here, and I slide it down, I thread it about halfway on, and then push it through, and then I pull the hook down to where it's straight. Right like that. So it's going to sit in the water, kind of like that. But that is my go-to way to hook these, and I've had a lot of success with these. Colors that work the best. This one is really good, the chartreuse and orange. Orange and white is killer at Green Valley. And Silverwood, or not Silverwood, Gregory. The other two standbys are the white and pink and the pink and white. So one's got a pink head and a white tail, and one's got a white head and a pink tail. Those are also excellent, excellent colors. But the problem with those is they work so good, I feel like sometimes the trout see it too much, so they get tired of it. So I'll go to some of these other colors. So here's a quick video of mice tails in action. I believe out at Silverwood. I had a great day fishing out there. I cleaned house in a couple hours, so enjoy the video. There you go. Yeah, I got him. throw him in the net. Oh yeah, that's a nice one. Oh, it's even hook jawed. All right, on to power worms. You can see I got two different types here. These are the Berkeley power worms, and these are Purdue Bait Company's worms. And they both float. And I'll show you the differences here, which is important. Here's a Berkeley worm. Here's a Purdue, and I'll lay them right next to each other. And you can see the Purdue worm is quite a bit bigger than the Berkeley worm. And the advantage of that is you can use a bigger hook in the Purdue. I like to use number 10 hooks in the Purdues. When I'm fishing these Berkeley worms, you got to use a number 14. If you can see that, that is a tiny, tiny hook. Now, I have caught decent sized fish up to 5 pounds on these little hooks and never had one straighten out on me. So it's not that big of a deal in the small hook. Don't let that scare you off, because you can still catch some good sized trout on these little tiny hooks. But if you're going to fish these, I usually fish these when the trout are being pretty shy, and I want to size down, especially size down the hook where they can't see the hook. Smaller bait, and hopefully provoke a bite. These Purdues work great, just like the Berkeley trout worms, but you can use the bigger hook, like I said. So I'll show you how I hook mine. So I usually start just like a quarter of the way down from the head, slide it into the body, and pop it through just like that. So just the hook sticking out, and this thing will float in the water and moves with the current and all that, and will attract the fish. Other ways to hook it are Wacky Rig, and these go equally for. This is the way I hook the Berkeley worms too. The only difference is using the smaller hook. So you can Wacky Rig it like that, and that works good as well. And there's another technique, especially with these smaller Berkeley ones, that I like to do, where I will thread it on a little bit and then push it through, and then I will pull the hook right to where it's sticking out like that. And I do that normally when fishing the Berkeleys, because it's got that tiny hook, and I want to make sure that hook's exposed for the trout. And the hook's so small, they probably can't see it even when it's hanging out here. The Purdues, I usually don't do this, but the Berkeleys, because they're small and they got that tiny 14 hook, I'll run it through just like this, so it's just hanging out like that, and you get a lot more hookups. Because sometimes with these smaller baits and they got that small hook, you get a lot of bites, but you don't get a lot of hookups, and that's probably part of the reason. So that's why I'll have the hook stick out like that. Colors, your standard colors are usually good producers. I don't really have one that's a standout as far as with these worms, other than this chartreuse shad color. Certain times of the year is just lights out at Green Valley for some reason. That watercolor, whatever. I use these little chartreuse shads usually around September, and usually they are all over this, as opposed to the other colors. So take that as you will, but this is the color I found works the best at Green Valley. All the other colors kind of work equally everywhere. So here's another video showing this in action, and I believe it's actually Green Valley, and I believe it's on chartreuse shad. So check it out. Yep, he's on there. Ugh. It's a little steep here to beach it. Yeah, it's not a big one. There we go. Ah, it's nice. All right, moving on to power eggs. Power eggs are a really good bait. These are a standby bait, or sometimes I use them as an accent on the night crawlers, and I'll show you that in a minute. But these are a bait I use usually when nothing else is working. Lots of times when the bite's dead, throw a little egg on there and you'll get some fish, surprisingly. Unfortunately, I don't have set colors that work better than others, because honestly, usually I get fish on the other baits before I go down to the power egg. But the pinks I've done good with, chartreuse and orange and the yellow, which is almost all of them. But one time or another, I've gotten into fish when they weren't biting just by switching to power eggs. So I'll show you how I rig these up. And these are, it's important to rig them properly, because there's been many times where I got bit on these several times but wasn't getting hooked up, and that's because the fish wasn't getting the hook. They were taking the bait but not taking the hook. So the best way to hook these is just kind of right in the edge, so you have as much hook exposed as possible, like that, just like that. And I like to just throw out a single. Some guys will use a bigger hook and put 2 on there. Either way works. This is just the way I do it. I prefer just doing 1 egg, because when I use these, usually the bite's slow, so I'm thinking in my head, smaller bait, smaller hook, smaller presentation may provoke the bite, so that's why I do it this way. One mistake I've made in the past is if you hook this thing right in the middle and push it up, and get the hook out of it, like that, that's great, and the hook's exposed. But what happens is if the fish grabs it and pulls, sometimes it pulls that barb back down into the bait. So you'll get a great, your strike indicator will fly up and your rod will bend, and then it'll be nothing. And that's what you reel up. And because basically that trout pulled that thing over the barb and couldn't hook itself. So that's really the biggest thing to watch out for when fishing these power eggs by themselves, just because their shape and they're round and they're pretty big. And they slide around on your hook and your line once the fish grabs it, and see, it just goes right back into the barb. So that's something to watch out for. So that's why I always try to do it right on the edge, so it has the most hook exposed. And you're using a small number 10 hook. Usually they can't see it anyway. They're just focusing on the bait, and usually that works. So here's a video. I think it's at the old mud hole, and this was a day where the fish weren't biting, except when we put on the power egg. So check that out. There it goes.
What's that on?
Cold bait. There you go. That's a nice one.
Yes.
Okay, last bait we're going to talk about is the night crawler. Like I said earlier, I don't have any live crawlers with me, so I'm going to use these little brown worms as a representation of a night crawler. Now, there's 2 ways I fish night crawlers. I fish them on a Carolina rig, and I really like fishing them under a bobber. Carolina rig, I will use either a 16 treble hook or a number 10 Mosquito, and I'll take a half or a third of it, and I'll push one part of it on, and then I double it up and hook it again is all I do, and let the rest hang off. Kind of like that, and you'll have probably about that much hanging off. Let me see, like that. So that's pretty much how I hook it, just twice. And on a Carolina rig, it needs to float, right? So you're going to need something to inject air into the body. So what you do is go down to the drugstore and get yourself a syringe. I'm fortunate, my wife owns a medical practice, so I can get syringes anytime. But they sell worm blowers in the store, but the gauge on the needle is huge. And what it does is it rips holes, big holes in the worm while you're putting air in it, and air can escape. So it's harder to inflate them. So that's why I suggest going to Rite Aid, and you can buy syringes and get real small gauge needles, like a 22 or a 25 is a really, really tiny needle. And all you do is pull back the plunger here, so it's just air in there, and stick it in the worm and inflate it. When you inflate it, you'll see it grow. You'll see the air go in there, and it'll fatten up your worm so it makes it look bigger. And inject that a few times. And like always, before you cast it, set it in the water and make sure it floats. If it ain't floating, you probably aren't fishing. But with a night crawler, catfish may pick it up off the bottom, but we're after trout, so we want this to float. Now, the other way I fish this is with a bobber. And what I'll do is with just a regular old bobber, and you clip this on your line. It has two clips, one on the bottom, one on the top. So you push down while holding the top clip and slide your line in there. And then you push down while holding on the bottom and slide your line in the time clip, or the top clip. And now it's on your line, it won't move. Okay, and I usually have about a 4 or 5 foot leader down to my bait. And what I do is I get a number 10 hook, just like this. So I'll thread the worm on here just like before, but not inflate it this time because we don't want it to float because we want it to hang below the bobber. And I'll just put a little scent on that and throw this out. Now, when fishing with a bobber like this, I like to fish it very close to shore, no more than 10 or 15 feet out. And usually early in the morning when there's no wind and your bobber will kind of stay in one position, because later in the afternoon, the wind always kicks up and you're always going to be tracking where your bobber's going, so it's not going over other people's lines and all that kind of stuff. But especially early in the morning, the trout tend to be very close, and I'll throw this out, and lots of times I'll get hit at certain lakes before I can even put my rod back in the rod holder. They just love it for whatever reason, suspended from a bobber. If you throw a Carolina rig in the same spot with an inflated night crawler, it doesn't work as well for some reason. I don't know if it's the slight movement of the bobber or what it is, but it seems to work very well. Another thing I'll do, I'll add a little garnish or a little color. And I'll add one of these power eggs. Up and slide up the line like that. And then I'll put the night crawler on. And then slide the egg right back to the top of the hook. And I want to keep it at the top of the hook so it's close enough that it represents the bait, but we don't have the same problem that we had when you're just fishing the power eggs, where the fish bites and pulls everything down under the barb and doesn't get hooked. So it looks something like that. Now, something of note, power eggs are very buoyant and they float very well. So sometimes your night crawler, especially if you're using just a third or a half a night crawler, may start to float just due to this power egg. So what you do is go about a foot up or a few inches up and put a little tiny BB split shot on there, and that'll help keep this. So now it'll sit a little bit higher, but it'll kind of be floating in the center of the water column or whatever depth you have it set at. All right, so here's a video showing this this technique in action. There we go. All right, ladies and gents, there you have it. That's about everything I know for bait and weight fishing for stock trout. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know it's a lot of information to digest, but believe it or not, I cut this down and the content down a couple times just so it didn't end up being a several hour long video, because there are a lot of things to cover. One thing of note, or actually two things, when fishing with bait, especially power bait for trout, I like to check my bait about every 30-45 minutes. Reason being is since your bait has to float, there's other small fish, sometimes trout, they may nibble and you might not see it. Your bait could fall off, whatever. But lots of times if I have my bait in the water for a long time and I'm not getting bit, almost every time I reel it in, there's no bait on the hook. So you don't know how long it's been sitting like that, and you kind of been wasting your time. So I always like to check my bait about every 30 or 45 minutes. And if you pick a spot at whatever lake you're at, and you're fishing for about an hour, sometimes maybe even 2 hours if you know it's a good spot, and you haven't gotten a nibble, it might be time to move. don't be afraid to change spots, because sometimes the trout do school up and move around, but sometimes there's certain areas that they just aren't hitting that day. So just move. Sometimes you move, 50 feet down, and first cast and you're right into them. So don't be afraid to pick up and move. And keep trying when you're out there. It looks like in the videos that I do, like I'm catching fish after fish every time I go, and that's just not true. That's the magic of editing. Lots of times I go out and I get skunked. But if I don't catch fish, I don't do a video on it. So it happens to all of us, and I have a pretty good handle on what I'm doing, and sometimes the fish just don't want to cooperate, and there's nothing you can do about it. But the fun of fishing is obviously catching the fish, but another part of it is just being outside with your friends and family, and or sometimes I go by myself, just being out in nature and enjoying the outdoors, and sometimes you catch a fish, sometimes you don't, and you just kind of relax. So to me, it's all good. So keep trying and keep learning. If you have any questions or comments, leave them for me, especially questions. I like answering them, so you're not bothering me. And we'll see you next time. Tight lines.